Thank you.
Benjamin Netanyahu there. We've seen a big picture, heard about the big picture there from our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette. I want to take you now to Tehran. We're joined by Professor Sayed Mohammad Marandi, who's in Tehran. He was a member of the Iranian delegation during the US-Iran nuclear talks. Can I ask you first about the reaction, the mood in Iran today?
Well, since this was an act of war and the United States murdered a senior Iranian official and military commander, there is extraordinary outrage in Iran and demands that Iran punish the United States. And the same is true in Iraq. The Americans also murdered a senior Iraqi commander who at the airport received General Soleimani at the Baghdad International Airport, and he too was murdered and killed alongside his entourage, and therefore the outrage among most Iraqis is quite clear and open, and I think that the Americans are miscalculating by behaving like a rogue regime that disregards Iraqi sovereignty, that murders at will, that ignores the orders of the Iraqi Prime Minister, that has an embassy the size of a country in Baghdad, that behaves like an imperial power. This is not going to serve American interests, and I think the Americans will soon recognize that its position in Iraq is no longer sustainable.
Professor Marandi, we're just showing our viewers some pictures, the latest pictures from the streets of Tehran. You say the Americans have miscalculated. Mike Pompeo has said in the last hour or so the risk of doing nothing was enormous. They had to act because of the threat posed by General Soleimani and the forces he commands.
Well, Pompeo is the same person who said at the CIA we had courses where we taught how to lie, cheat, and steal. This is the same person, if I'm not mistaken. And the United States, this is the same regime in Washington that lied its way into a war in Iraq. So there's nothing honest about anything that comes from Washington. But this is our turf, and this is an attack on our sovereignty and our dignity, and the dignity of the people of Iraq. And the Americans are going to have to face the consequences. Imagine a foreign country was to kill the most senior officials or military officials in the British armed forces, what would the British response be? That's exactly the sort of response that people are discussing right now.
So about that response,
Western countries cannot expect double standards. They destroyed Iraq.
Let me ask you then about that response and how you think that retaliation could come.
Well, I think obviously Iraqis will demand the full withdrawal of the United States from their country, and most probably there will be armed conflict if the United States does not do so. The Americans have been murdering Iraqi war heroes that have been fighting ISIS for a long time now. Every time just a few days ago, they murdered 30 soldiers on the Iraq-Syria border who were on the front line of fighting ISIS. The Americans clearly don't want the Syrian-Iraqi border opened, so they want to strangle the Syrian economy, and they want to isolate Syria from Iraq, so they empower ISIS by
Iraqis
murdering
want. You're talking
Iraqi
about
soldiers.
the reaction of people in Iraq, but we have also seen celebrations in Tahrir Square in Baghdad from those who've been demonstrating for weeks and for longer against Iranian influence on the government of Iraq. So some are celebrating this airstrike.
Don't mislead yourself. I think that by now people in Western countries should have recognized that the Baathists, those who fought for Saddam Hussein, they obviously would be celebrating. And those who supported ISIS, they too would be celebrating. And those who work for American NGOs, which there are over 1,000 in Iraq, they too would be celebrating. But you will see in the coming hours and days the huge numbers of people who will be coming to the streets for the funeral, as they did for the funeral a couple of days ago for the 30 soldiers that the Americans murdered on the Iraqi-Syrian border. Again, I think the problem in Western countries is that the propaganda against Iran is extensive, but they come to believe their own propaganda. For 40 years now, it's been that Iran is hatred, Iran is unpopular, the so-called regime, as the Western media likes to call it, is despised at home, but it is powerful, it is popular, it is prepared to defend itself. And in Iraq, if the United States was so popular, then why are they constantly bombing and killing and murdering people? There's a paradox
because
here.
We're
the
showing
United
our
States
viewers,
has lost across the board.
We're showing
in
our
Syria,
viewers right
lost.
now pictures from General Soleimani's hometown. There are hundreds, possibly thousands of people there in the streets demonstrating, beginning the mourning for the general. I want to ask you, Professor Marandi, if this situation escalates, and you've talked about the sovereignty and dignity of Iran and the need for some retaliation, if the situation escalates, surely it will also damage the people of Iran, where your economy is staggering already.
Well, the Americans are far more vulnerable than Iran is. The United Arab Emirates, which is aiding the United States in its economic war against Iran and which is providing the United States with military installations to behave aggressively towards Iran, is extremely vulnerable. So is Saudi Arabia. These two countries are facing enormous problems because of the massacres that they've been carrying out in Yemen for the past few years. They've drained their resources. So it's not as if the United States and its close allies, like the Saudi regime, they are doing very well. They are much more vulnerable than Iran because they have many more assets alongside the Persian Gulf that can be destroyed. But remember, the United States created al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. The United States aided Saddam Hussein, gave him chemical weapons. Then, after they empowered Saddam Hussein and helped him use those chemical weapons, even against his own people, then they had a war against Saddam. Then they imposed sanctions where they killed a million Iraqis. Then they invaded and destroyed Iraq through lies, claiming that they had nuclear weapons and that they were linked to al-Qaeda, lie after lie after lie. In Syria, the United States with the Saudis, they destroyed the country through supporting extremists. They've destroyed this region. They've destroyed Syria. You can blame the Syrian government, but the reality is that Western governments, they were the ones who've created this mess in Libya, Yemen. Iranians know that if they don't stand firm, that they will be next. So
there's no option. We're going to leave it there with your words that if Iran knows it has to stand firm, or they will be next. Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi, thank you for joining us live from Tehran. Thank you.